Welcome to Reimagining Cyber. I'm your host, Tyler Moffat, and in this episode, we're diving deep into the often overlooked foundation of secure software, design stage security. Joining us is Dmitry Schwartzman, a security visionary who went from leading security at PayPal to co-founding Prime Security. Dmitry is going to unpack why so many teams treat the design phase like a blind spot and how AI is finally giving security the seat at the table before a single line of code is written, and what it means to truly shift left. Dmitry, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Dmitry, you went through from leading security at PayPal to co-founding Prime Security. What's the story behind all that?
I, throughout my entire career in security, worked in startups and small companies, and I loved it. And then I decided it was time to see what the enterprise is all about. And the thought process behind that was always, I want to build something of my own down the line, and I want to experience on both ends of be the, so to speak, both ends of the table, both as a small vendor as well as an enterprise making those decisions. I joined, and in full transparency and honesty, I thought that it's gonna be for 2, maybe 3 years at this big enterprise, but then exciting things were happening, changes, interesting work, and what's the difference between 2-3 years and 6? Because that's when the idea behind Prime Security came along, and it was a very good time to go back to building.
Good stuff. For our listeners here, can you break down what design stage security means in sort of the simplest terms?
Absolutely. If we, like you said, simplify things and talk about the stages of building a product, and it's very relevant to software-based products, but actually, if you think about it, any kind of product, in simple terms, there are 3 stages. And I'm going to start from the last stage and move from that to the earliest one. And the last one is runtime. Essentially, the product exists, it operates, and it's all done. Now there are different modifications, improvements, next versions of that product, but it exists in the world. Prior to that, there's build time, when we sit down and build the product. In parallel to software-based products, it will be writing the code that will transform into a product once it's all put together and comes together. There's another stage before that, and that is the design stage, when we actually think about what we want to build, and we start gathering the requirements, we start drawing out the design on top of which we will do the building. And that space, when it comes to specifically security, and when it comes to assessment of that space, has always been done manually.
Gotcha. Why do you think it's such a blind spot for so many teams?
I think it's a blind spot for the entirety of code-driven or software-based development. The reason being, and we treat it as a blind spot, and I actually want to maybe define it slightly differently. It's not that we didn't know it existed. It wasn't one of those situations where we woke up, it's like, oh wow, we actually missed this whole phase and we've never touched it. It always was there. We've always been trying to integrate into that design phase. Problem is, up until recent times, we didn't have the relevant technical tools to deal with it at scale. So it was just locked to us. And the only way that we could treat it was to throw people at it. Well, if you think about an enterprise with tens of thousands of people, similar to PayPal, no matter how many security people you have, it's never enough to cover everything. So you have to pick and choose, and that's why it's not so much as a blind spot, but there's just not enough people to cover everything that is going on there. And that is where the origin of security concerns and issues in security actually happen. It's then being cemented through every other stage, and there's just different ways to take advantage of it. But not implementing security at that stage what contributes to a lot of the problems that we have. One of the most fundamental, or if I can club them, I would say there are security logic issues that creep up in the design stage. It's not so much about the tactical, usage of vulnerable libraries or leveraging, implementing something wrong in the code that can then trickle down and cause an incident. It's how we think about what we're building without security, but just with customers in mind, business requirements, all that good stuff. But oftentimes, there's no very specific or general even understanding of what are the security implications that will be caused if we don't bake in security at this stage. So for the first time since doing security or security existing, and I might be going a bit bombastic here, but I believe I can, because who's going to stop me, really? Security has the chance to understand the context, the business context, and then overlay it with potential security concerns and threats, and take care of those from before single line of code is even written. So if you think about it, it's pretty amazing, because we now can have a seat at the table during the design stage and help developers to reduce the rework that will happen once something is shipped. And the ability to do smarter, faster, more secure, and shorter time to market for organizations, those possibilities are just phenomenal. Again, of course, I'm biased, but why wouldn't you want to build something from the ground up properly so that down the line you won't have to rework it? I think it's only logical to me.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense. And it seems pretty hard to embed, security early, especially in large enterprises. What about startups? Do they handle this better, or is it a universal problem? What would you say?
I, Fantastic. I think it's very much a universal problem, because if large organizations and enterprises very much care about the business and business wins, and they want to ship things super fast because they have bigger competitors, and they need to move as quick as an enterprise can, startups are moving 10, if not 100, if not 1,000 times quicker. Yeah. So it's the whole move fast, break fast mentality, where like, hey, let's go. I mean, we got to ship those things out, and we'll course correct as we move forward. I think it's a universal problem. It's just, I think there's a point, there's that friction point, or I would say a tipping point, where it starts to be very painful and very, very dangerous. If you're a startup with 3-4 customers, it's important, painful, not as much. If you're now a Series B company with potentially hundreds of customers, now that's where it's getting already very dangerous.
Right. So if you're addressing security too late, like, how does that affect the teams in real world terms? Do you have any examples of like late stage fixes that impacted the velocity or the risk or something like that?
Oh, of course. If you think about roadmaps of products, no one is pausing and saying, okay, let's now bring in all of the security findings that we found. Let's analyze all of the root cause analysis that we've conducted because of incidents or reports of bug bounty or all that. Let's stop all of our sprints and let's do 3 dedicated security fixes. I've yet to find an enterprise that does that, honestly, or any decent sized company.
Sure.
The reality is, we have that much more features that we need to ship. We have a very big important customer that we need to win. Again, the business always wins. It moves forward. So the cost boils down to risk, if you think about it, because the cost of it is the security organization coming back and saying, look, if we don't fix all the things that we found in prod, right, or at runtime, once that already exists, then here is the risk. And now business, either we accept this risk because we are one unit, and I'm kind of like opening up a different segue here, but I don't think it's a conversation of, hey, business, you need to take this decision because we security brought this to your doorstep. No, it's one organization, and security strives to be a business enabler. So as such, it's like, hey, here's the risk that we as a business need to decide on. So either we're going to fix this, either we're going to accept some of it and push out some of it, or we are running a very high risk of serious trouble.
Sure.
Right. So what if you could slice that by a very high percentage because you caught a big portion of it? I'm not saying everything because I don't believe in silver bullets. There's no such thing as perfect security, right?
Agreed.
Like, it's not.
Agreed.
Yes, I get there. But if you can take a big chunk of it bring it forward when developers are still talking about what that implementation of how to do the what that was brought to them by the product managers and everyone else. And now you're saying, yeah, but you also need to take into account these four things. Great. So now we can plan accordingly. So maybe it's not going to take us a sprint. It's going to take us 2 sprints or a sprint and a half. Sure, we're uploading up front first, or maybe even less than that, but we're reducing substantially that risk conversation down the line.
That's good stuff. So, one thing I've got to talk about, because every podcast we mention it, AI's role in all this. Like, where do you think AI is useful in design stage security now, where maybe it wasn't before? Can you talk to me about that?
Of course, I mentioned earlier that design stage is not a blind spot. It was always there. We always tried to take care of it, but it was sporadic because it was manual. That key to unlock scale and do this in a more automatic fashion is thanks to large language models.
Yeah.
Because now there is an ability to deal with large quantities of data that were locked in unstructured source of information. For example, it's one of those methodologies that we operate in at Prime Security, and that is ingesting information from Jira. But the tickets are, because Jira is super flexible, and so each organization builds it and customizes that. So how do you do this at scale? Well, thanks to the right usage of a tool, which is not a solution. A lot of people treat AI as a magical solution that's going to solve all problems.
Yeah.
That's not a way to go about it. But if you use it as a tool for what it's really good for, and that is working with large quantities of data, of unstructured data, the ability to analyze, process, and extract it, and what we refer to as productizing that data. Now, all of a sudden, the things you can do with that, and we have our own processes and our own, let's call it secret sauce of how we conduct those analysis. Now it's unlocked. And before the maturity of codename AI, because we throw everything under that name, but it's for the sake of the conversation, before that maturity arrived, we couldn't do any of that. And it was back to manual processing. I think that's the biggest revolution and the unlocking that is happening specifically in design stage, because that's the conversation we're having right now, but also in a bunch of other areas in security, which I think is super exciting.
Absolutely. But these AI agents that are helping you solve these problems, is there a risk in them becoming a new attack surface?
I see you flipped here on me. That this is good. Like with every technical tool, there are obviously opportunities to whether if it's to leverage it, whether if it's to use it against you. So the answer is, I think, absolutely yes.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of companies that are doing great work in securing AI. So there is, if you build and if you leverage AI in your product, it's a must to think about the guardrails that you put in place in order to secure that from turning into another vector. 100% in agreement. Is that going to be the next frontier? I don't know. I'm not sure, because honestly, there are so many, and I will say the super cool ways that attackers are now leveraging AI
Absolutely.
in order to expand their attack vectors. I don't think targeting AI is the main one. It's one of, for sure.
For sure.
But there are so many other areas which we need to deal with as an industry, because when we use it to do good, as we all have seen and heard, bad guys are using it to do harm.
That's a good answer. No, I like that. Let's talk about shift left and the security needs behind that. What does that look like? Help us out. Walk us through that.
I think we've been doing a lot of that shift left approach and mentality once we've broken down the software development lifecycle and identified additional or earlier points of ingestion where we could intervene from a security standpoint, right? And so that's where the code scanners were born and placed and have been evolving ever since. So big shout out to all the colleagues and friends that are building ASPMs and other code scanning tools, which are super critical and super important. What I'm identifying is that there's another trend that is happening. There's a big shift of switching from just focusing on the software component, on the application component, into a much broader product. So there's much more conversation around ProdSec that it used to be versus just AppSec. And AppSec is now a component within ProdSec, which is just obvious. So if we're now expanding that and we're looking from the SDLC to product development lifecycle, there are additional stages, which opens up the need to start looking at it much more holistically and identifying additional new intervention points for security to step in. So that transition to, okay, where else can we put ourselves in to not be a blocker, be an enabler, but also stop from bad things happening, is that earliest stage of requirement gathering and designing and architectural design that is happening before we move to build. So that's exactly the additional or the left where we at right now that we have the opportunity to put ourselves in. I don't think there's anything even further left from that. I'll be surprised, but we always invent new things. I think that by ingesting ourselves into the design stage and then continuing being present and evolving in build time, which is where code is actually created, and then continuing our security practices at runtime with all the existing tooling there. Once that thread is connected, we can talk about preemptive security through and through. Today, I think the opportunity that presents itself to shift into design opens the door to preemptive security. I'm on purpose getting away from proactive because I think it's a whole philosophical debate if security can ever be proactive, but preemptive for sure. And by moving forward and then connecting all of these stages together, we're looking at a very fascinating age of holistic security that we've been dreaming about, but now it's starting to become a reality.
Yes, absolutely. And you had mentioned earlier some of these obviously startups moving very fast. How do you maintain security at scale when multiple dev teams are shipping fast, or what's needed to keep design stage security from getting like lost across the teams when they're moving this quick?
Automation, and a bit more automation. And if I haven't mentioned it, then automation.
Okay.
That's honestly, that's the only solution. There's no way that we can win this uphill battle by by manual processes or even semi-automated processes. The only way we can be where we need to be as security practitioners and professionals is by doubling down on automation, by identifying more opportunities for automation and baking that in. Because over the past years, right, let's say decade, the velocity and speed of development, I don't know, let's say quadrupled itself, right? I know there are numbers, I just don't recall them top of my head, right? With the introduction of AI and the fascinating companies such as Cursor and all the other co-pilots, I think we all can agree that that's gonna, I don't know, quadruple if it hasn't already. So, which is great for the business because now they can ship features that much faster. But it also really sucks for security because there's that much more things that you need to have eyes on and to secure. And if we're staying behind, which has been the case in a lot of past years where we were playing catch up, we're going to lose. So it's all about how we can harness the same, again, tools that are being used for different use cases in this particular conversation for code generation, and in our need for understanding the business context and the design that is happening and what are the concerns from a security standpoint, and providing recommendations right at that checkpoint, the game is lost. So to your question, it's just doubling down, tripling down, whatever you can say, right, on automation from security standpoint. And I will say that from a lot of the conversations that we've been having, I have to applaud a lot of the CISOs and a lot of the companies where the CISOs are taking lead and the charge in the company's adoption of AI capabilities. There's still a lot of companies that are very much hesitant for obvious reasons, and I totally understand it, of incorporating AI, whether if it's adopting AI tools, whether if it's adopting products that leverage AI for a variety of reasons. And it's amazing to see how CISOs who historically been the ones that are more risk averse are taking the lead in saying, I want my organization to adopt AI based tools or to implement AI to show that it's the right approach and we can do this and we can secure it properly so that the rest of the organization will feel a lot more comfortable in that adoption. So big kudos to everyone who's doing it.
That's good. Good recommendations and what you like for CISOs. I mean, you're kind of touching on it too, but like looking ahead, what's one thing that excites you and one thing that worries you about the future of AI in security?
The speed of evolution of AI and the tools. I'm not very much concerned. Maybe I should be, but personally, right now, I'm not very much concerned of the whole doomsday scenario, AI taking over the world. But
Skynet? You don't think
if
Skynet's happening?
Skynet,
Yeah.
yeah, as a true geek, there is a part of me that says, the age of Skynet is around the corner. And we need to look for that Terminator to come and save the world. That being said, or putting it aside, I if you think about, or if you look at the speed of the models that were released and the things that you can now do versus when ChatGPT was introduced to our life, that curve is insane.
Agreed.
And I think that, to me, one of the biggest indicators are the image generators. I remember when I was playing with the first versions of the image generators, and you had, like
Totally.
the eye was smushed, right? Like the
10
the
fingers.
hand didn't have exactly 10 fingers on one hand, right?
Yeah.
That was like what, a year ago?
2 years ago,
maybe?
and it's end of 2022 is when it first started, I think.
Right. And today you have from prompt to full videos
I know.
with insane samples of full-on humans with unique characteristics, eye color, tattoos. I've seen crazy things.
Yeah.
That's just in 2 years.
No, for sure.
Right. So what excites me and scares me at the same time is that how fast this whole tech is evolving, because it excites me what we can do as defenders. It scares the bejesus out of me what the attackers are going to do with this as well.
It's good stuff. I guess looking to wrap this up, what is some advice that you would give security leaders trying to make the case for earlier investment?
Great question. I think that because it all boils down to risk, and our entire career is based on risk management, the biggest, I think, contributing factor is what tools do we have in our toolbox to better and more effectively deal with risk. And the more security practitioners and professionals will push out adoption of AI-based tools to help them scale, the worse they're going to be, because attackers are not saying, I don't want to use this, or there are some compliance concerns or some other stuff that forbids me from using this. I think the biggest push is we've always been understaffed as an industry. There's always the attack surface has always grown more than we can cover it.
I agree with that.
And we've always had, and the amount of data that we collect to analyze to identify attacks just keeps on growing. All of this to say, if we don't adopt capabilities today to help us scale, augment, and deal with it, at a broader capacity, we're not going to be just left behind and slowly catch up. We're going to lose flat out. So I think it boils down to, if you want to be at a level where you can effectively deal with risk that is growing against the organization, because we all passed that stage of it's not going to happen to me. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Mm-hmm.
And with scaling capabilities of the attackers leveraging AI, that when just got much shorter.
Right.
And so if you don't countermeasure with same capabilities, it's a done deal. It's a lose game.
Absolutely. That's good stuff. Great advice. I appreciate you coming on, Dimitri. Where can folks, follow your work or learn more about Prime Security?
LinkedIn, so Dimitri Schwartzman, or primesec.ai. our website. We have great resources. We've published a bunch of information about design stage and ProdSec. And reach out directly. I always love hearing from people and catching up. So Dimitri at primesec.ai.
Thank you again, Dimitri. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Hello, producer Ben here, and about 5 minutes or so into Tyler and Dimitri's conversation, they touched on the subject of startups and how they're handling the design stage security problem. As you can imagine, it's not the first time that the issue of startups and cybersecurity has cropped up on Reimagining Cyber. Let me point you back to episode 37, called Aligning Cybersecurity with Startup Business Goals. It featured Ty Sabano, CISO of Vercel, who shared his unique perspective on running the security business in the startup space.
I'd like to quote Mike Tyson here. I think everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think that first 100 days, we all have this glorious idea of 30, 60, 90. But in startup land, you have to be willing to adjust accordingly.
That was Ty Sabano from episode 37, called Aligning Cybersecurity with Startup Business Goals. Thanks for listening to Reimagining Cyber. We will be back next Wednesday. So if you're wondering what to do with your time until then, why not leave us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Goodbye.